Welcome everyone to today's class, a deep dive into intake and charting templates. The goal of today's class is to give you an understanding of how to utilize and build intake forms, intake flows, as well as charting templates for efficient client data collection. So we'll be spending a lot of time in the forms library here. So I'm going to go ahead and start in that forms library area. All right. So first, I just want to get us familiar and comfortable with the forms library. As you're starting out, you may have a handful of form templates already added to the library. So you are able to use those to whatever extent you would like. You can edit those existing templates. You can archive or delete those templates. But of course, you can create your own templates and own forms from scratch. And we will walk through how to do that in today's class. We have several different columns to give us some insight into our forms here. First, we have our type column, and this will indicate whether a form is an intake, charting, or program form. And I can also filter by types as well. So on this right-hand section, you can see that I can filter into just my intake forms, charting template, or program forms. We also have the name of our form, who it was created or built by, and then when it was last updated. All the way to the right, we have these three dots where I clicked into a moment ago to show that you can archive and delete forms, but you can also click into view them or preview the form, as well as edit or request form completion. So if I want to send a one-off form request to a client, I can go ahead and request form completion from my forms library and send it to either a client group or to an individual client. You do have the option as well to set up recurring forms. So if I want to send a form to a client group and have them fill out this form on a monthly basis, I could do that. And there's some other frequencies here as well. And the other item under that little actions option is to share and embed a form. So we can share a form to be completed outside of Healthie if we would like. We can either grab the code to embed that onto a website or a sharing link where we can copy that link and share that link wherever we need to. As you build out forms, they will of course appear in your forms library, but there are a few forms that are not in your forms library that you do have access to share either in intake flows or request directly through a client's profile. And those are some standard forms that, again, are just not visible in the forms library. So those forms include a billing info form where clients can enter their billing or credit card information to have on file in Healthie. Also an insurance information form, so they can enter their insurance info, add even photos of their insurance card, and a photo ID form as well. All right, so we are going to go ahead and start with creating our own intake form. So in the upper right-hand corner here, you see the option to create a form. As I mentioned, you can certainly edit an existing form. So if I wanted to click in and edit this ABC charting note, I could either click edit all the way to the right or just click on the title itself, and it will take me into our form builder and I can adjust that form as needed. But in this case, we are going to go ahead and create a new intake form. And I'll title this my new intake form. So we'll name that form and then click submit, and we will again be taken in to that edit view in that form builder. Once we're in here, we can go ahead and build out our form by dragging and dropping these question fields on the left-hand side under our question bank onto our form. There are several different question banks here, and what we're seeing right now is our default question bank, where really it just gives me the formatting of different question types, and I can edit those from there. So of course, with these open answer and multiple choice options I dragged on here, I would want to go ahead and title those whatever I need it to be. I also can mark questions as required. So if I go ahead and select required, this question would have to be filled out. Something would have to be entered here. If it's a multiple choice option, then something would have to be selected in order for them to actually complete and submit that form. But we can also leave those as optional if we would like as well. So again, We can title these questions however we would like to. There are, as I mentioned, multiple question banks. So the default will be those basic question formats, but then these other question banks are here for you to utilize in case there's any pre-built questions that are gathering information that may be relevant to the form that you're creating. Things like charting, agreement. This will be where you can find that e-signature field or even a read-only field if you just want to add copy to a form. But one question bank in particular that I really want to call out is the client info question bank. So if I go ahead and click into the client info question bank, you will, of course, find questions here that are client information. These questions in this question bank are what we call smart fields in Healthie. So smart fields are going to allow you to do a couple of things. First is take information that the client filled out for that question in their intake form and include it or pre-fill it on a charting template where you use that same question field. So if I go ahead and use the name, date of birth, and referring provider smart fields here, now when my client fills out this intake form and they enter their name, date of birth, and referring provider, I can also create a charting template where I drag these smart fields onto that template and it will pre-fill with the information that they entered. It will also fill that information in where this field lives within their profile. So these fields are all pieces of information that live somewhere within the client's profile or client account. And so whatever they enter on their intake form will also fill in that field in their client profile so that they do not need to re-enter it or you do not need to re-enter it on their behalf. There is one other way as well to map information from an intake form that the client enters to a charting note or a charting template. So these questions here we talked through are smart fields, but there is the option as well to create copied fields. So if I have any custom questions or custom pieces of information that we don't have a pre-built question or smart field for, I can go ahead and create my own question. So as I did before, I will go ahead and create my new question here. I'll name this one my copied field question. And once I have that question or that field set up how I like, I'm going to go ahead and click copy on the question itself. Now, you'll see that it took me already to the copied question bank. But now if I ever navigate to that copied question bank, which is the last question bank in that dropdown, I will be able to find that question that I just added there, my copied field question. So let's go ahead and find, I'll just do a quick search. My copied field question. Perfect. It's all the way at the bottom, of course. And you'll notice that this question also, all of the copied fields have a little question mark. This is going to give you information as to where this question or this field is going to pull information from. So in this case, my copied field question, it's saying this field was copied from the My New Intake form and will always pre-fill with the answers from that form. So if client A fills out the intake form with this question field on there, and I also include this question field, and we'll walk through what this looks like when we build out a charting note. I also include that copied question on my charting template. Then when I use that charting template for that client, their response to that question is going to pre-fill in that field on my charting note. A couple of other optimizations that we can use for our forms here that I like to call out. First is adding a document or a PDF to a form. So I mentioned under that agreement section, we do have the option to, or agreement question bank, I should say, we do have the option to add a read-only field, but we also can add a document or a folder for the client to open from that form. We also can use that read-only field. Let me see if I already have here we go. I already have my read-only field here, so I'll just drag that to the top. We can also use this read-only field to insert a logo. So I can select the insert image icon here, and this will prompt me to upload an image or insert an image file. So we would recommend here having a file on hand of your logo and then just entering or inserting that image into this read-only field. And that would give us a nice logo at the top of our form. I did mention already we have that e-signature option under this agreement question bank as well. One other question bank that I haven't called out yet is our video question bank. And this will simply give us the option to add a video to our form. So I can drag and drop that video. And when I click edit, it's going to ask me to enter the sharing URL from whatever video hosting platform that I'm using. So a common one we see is YouTube. So I would just get the sharing link for that YouTube video and insert it here. And that would embed the video right on my form. I'll go ahead and remove that just to gain that space back. And one last question field that I like to call out is under charting. All the way, let's see if it's all the way at the bottom here. Here we go. The option to add an anatomical charting field. So with this field, I'll go ahead and preview my form under options. I can mark up my anatomical charting question field here, and I can add notes as needed. Can toggle to the front and back of that field and add some relevant notes using that figure and the notes section. All right. I briefly clicked into that options button, so let's open that back up and talk through what options are under there. There are several. First is, of course, the option to preview our form, which I just walked through. We can also copy a form. This will create a duplicated version of our form. And so if I go ahead and click on copy, we can do that. You'll see here the name of this form is now my new intake form copy. That means that this is the copied version. So I still have my new intake form, that first version, and I can edit this second version or this duplicated copy without affecting that first version. I could also update the name on my form. So I can go to rename, and maybe I'll insert that this is version 2. I can download form responses for a form. So if I've sent this form to 100 clients and I just want to get a comprehensive view of what all the responses to this form have been, then I could go ahead and click download, and it will create a CSV file for me to open up and see all of the responses. This is another spot where I can request form completion. So if I were to come into this options button in the form builder view, I could again send that form request. I can once again share and embed that form externally. Share with colleagues is the next option here. And this is going to give me the option to add this form template to the Healthie account of another provider that uses Healthie outside of my organization. So if there's someone in my network that maybe I want to go ahead and share this form with so that they can use it in their practice, I can enter their email address that they use with Healthie, and it will add the template to their account. Of course, you each would have your own version, so your edits would not affect theirs and vice versa. The next options under here are converting the form. So right now, when I go ahead and just create a form from scratch, it will default to being an intake form. So if I instead want to be creating a charting note, I would click on convert to charting form, and that will have it live in my forms library as a charting form. I can also convert it to a program form if I don't need this living as an intake or a charting note. I'm only going to use this in my programs that I offer. I could convert it to a program form as well. And then lastly, we can of course delete this form here as well, but also generate a PDF. So if I want to download a PDF version of this form, I could go ahead and do that. So now that we have an intake form built out, and actually if we go back here, again, we have 2 intake forms built out. The next thing that I may want to do is add this form to an intake flow. So let's go to our intake flows page and talk through how those intake flows function and how we can create those. I'm going to go ahead and select the intake flows tab from my forms library. And you'll see here that I have several intake flows already built out, But when you first get started, you will have likely just one intake flow. It will be a default intake flow, and it will have just a welcome message for your clients. And you can, again, utilize that intake flow to whatever extent you would like. You can add forms to it, you can edit it, you can create a brand new intake flow and delete that old one, whatever you need to do there. Intake flows you can generally think of as just a bundle of forms that are going to automatically send to your clients when they get started with you. So I have several intake flows built out here. And the reason that you might build out multiple intake flows is if you want to associate certain intake flows with certain client groups. So if you have different types of clients joining your practice or working with you, and some need these specific forms while others might need to complete different forms, then you can build out those different client groups and place those clients into the relevant group and then associate the relevant intake flow or bundle of forms with that client group. I can, of course, create an intake flow from nothing with my create intake flow option in the upper right-hand corner. But in this case, I'll go ahead and click edit on one of my existing intake flows. Let's click into my insurance pay client intake flow. So I'll just click on the name, but as always, I could come over here to the right and click on manage and go into that edit view. Before we actually click in there, let me just highlight these options under the actions button as well. First, we can change the groups that receive this specific intake flow. So if I wanted to remove a group from receiving this flow, edit a group, or add a group to this flow, anything like that, I can go ahead and change groups. And I can also change which flow is my default intake flow. So anyone that doesn't have a specific intake flow assigned, if I have, let's say, any groups that I have not added to another specific intake flow, they would just receive my default flow. So if I wanted to mark this insurance pay client intake flow as my default, I have the option to do that. And then, of course, I can delete it altogether. In this case, I'll go ahead and manage my intake flow. So here we can see the forms that I've already added to this flow. You'll see this billing info form, which I mentioned is not in your forms library, but you can add it to an intake flow, as well as the photo ID form. So we'll move that up. We can reorder these however needed. And then if I want to add any forms, I can come here all the way to the bottom and click to add a new form. So let's go ahead and add a couple of more forms. First, let's add the insurance form, because that is an additional form that I mentioned is not in the forms library, but you do have the option to add it to an intake flow. So I'll add that form and drag it up to the top. And I'll also add my new intake form that I built out. So let me search for that, my new intake form. Here we go. And I'll mark that one as required, which means that clients do have to actually complete that form in order for their intake flow to be marked as complete. If I leave a form optional, then they could skip that form and still technically complete their intake flow. All right, now if I want to preview this flow, I can select preview in the upper right-hand corner, and I can click through those forms to see what my clients will see when they fill out this intake flow. So, and the other reason I like to preview it with those forms that aren't in your forms library is so that you can see them. So this first one, billing information, as I mentioned, this will collect card information. Photo ID will ask for an upload of their photo ID image. Insurance info form, so that's going to get their policy information, and so on. So next we'll have the form that I built out and all of those other forms that are included in this intake flow. All right, I'm going to click back to my forms library, and the last thing that we are going to touch on here is creating a charting template. So now we have created an intake form. We've discussed how to include that intake form in an intake flow. But now once we've collected that information from the client and it is time for our session, how do we chart on that client or that patient with a template that we have created? So as I mentioned, when you create a form to begin with, it will live as an intake form. But we can convert that to a charting template once we've entered the edit view or the form builder view for that form. So let's go ahead and now create my new charting note, and we'll click submit. Once I'm in here, what I will do is select options and then convert to charting form. Now, because this is a charting form, you'll notice this pre-fill option has appeared here. And this will give us the ability to pre-fill forms with the answers from the last session. So if I use this charting note on session 1 and I enter a bunch of information, and then I use that same template for session 2 for that client, it will pre-fill my questions as I enter them and left them in session 1. As I noted, those smart fields and copied fields will allow me to see the information that was entered on the intake form for those questions. So if I want to make sure that I'm seeing that information really easily dragged over to my or copied over to my charting note as the client entered them, then I'll make sure that those question fields are added to this charting note template as well. So I'll go ahead and add those smart fields that I used on the intake form. I'll go to my copied question bank, and all the way down at the bottom, I have my copied field question, which again pulls from my new intake form. And I'll add that. And then I might, of course, add some other charting question fields here or any other custom fields. There we go. Perfect. All right, so I have created my charting note. It is converted to living as a charting template in Healthie. And so now let's talk through where to actually create these charting notes from the client's profile, not only where to create and view the charting notes, but also the intake forms. So if I navigate to one of my client's profiles, we'll find Nancy Drew. I'm going to go ahead and click to the charting tab. So here I can view charting information as well as intake form or intake information. So if I want to view any of those forms that my clients have already filled out, I can select View Forms and get an overview of what has been completed, not started. I can fill out intake forms on my client's behalf. And I can also, once again, request form completion from this area as well. And this option will give me the option to request the standard forms that don't show in your forms library, the billing info, photo ID, profile picture, and insurance form. I could request those as a one-off request or reoccurring request here as well. And it's also where I can come to create a new charting note. So if I want to now use my charting template, I can select Create Charting Note. I'll find my new charting note here, retitle it if I need to, and create my note. So now I'm able to go ahead and fill out this charting note using the template that I created while working with my client. I have a few different save options when I'm done charting on my client or my patient. I can simply save and close this note. I can sign it, which will stamp it with my name associated with the time that I signed it. Similarly to locking it. So that will also note the time that it is locked, or I can do both at the same time. I can sign and lock that note. I also have the option to share my charting note with the client if I choose to. So charting notes by default will not automatically share with your clients. If you do want to share any of this information with them, you would need to go ahead and select share. And from here, you have the option as well to only share certain fields. So you might have internal only sections added to or fields added to your charting note, whereas other fields you might choose to share with them. So maybe I have this field down at the bottom where I designate any information that I want to share with them. And I can go ahead and select that only. I can preview what I'm about to share with them, and I can share that one field. If I want to share it with my client via their client portal, I can add it to the documents section of their portal. So they will have their own documents page, and I can select Add to Documents, viewable by clients, and they will be able to see it as one of their Healthie documents. But I also have a couple of other options here in terms of sharing. I can download or print a PDF. So this will just open the PDF version of that and I can download it. And I can also send this as a fax or e-fax through Healthie. And just to call out here, our faxing page is where we would see any of those sent or received faxes. So all the way on the left-hand side on our menu, we can fax in general, but of course we can just send this as a fax right from the charting note itself. If I click back to the edit view of my charting note, so I'll just click back to my charting history here and I'll click into edit. I can also open other forms or notes as I'm still in this edit view of my note. So if I want to, for example, reference an intake form, we'll go ahead and select, let me back up here, selecting the plus option to create a new tab in Healthie. I can select intake, charting, or program from my existing form dropdown. I can also open up a new note and be editing, multiple notes at the same time. But let's say I want to view an intake form. I can go ahead and select from the intake forms that this client has filled out, and I can open that form. And now I can navigate between the two. So I have my charting note here where I can go ahead and be charting on my patient, but I can also reference this tab as needed, and I can open multiple tabs as needed. So I could go ahead and maybe open the charting note from my last session, and then I can close those out. One other way to optimize my efficiency when charting is using smart phrases. So you'll notice here for any of these long answer fields, I have this little light bulb icon. And if I click on this, it is going to show me any smart phrases that I have created. And these are basically phrases that I've already typed up that I can go ahead and automatically add to my note. This one is a table, and save me time when I'm actually charting or in a session so that I don't need to recreate the wheel every single time that I go to make a certain recommendation or add certain notes to my charting note. If I don't have one created yet, I could click to create a smart phrase and create one quickly here. But I can also always go to my settings and make them ahead of time on my smart phrases settings page and add a smart phrase here. I can also create charting notes quickly for a specific session from the appointment type itself. So if I were to go into my calendar here, and let's say I have an upcoming appointment with this client, I'm going to go ahead and open the appointment details. And right now, since I have not yet created a charting note for that client, I actually don't have to go all the way into their profile, into the charting section to create that note. I could instead come into the appointment details and select not written, which specifies that I haven't yet created any charting notes for this session. And when I click on not written, I can then again go ahead and select the template that I want to use, and I'll be taken into that charting view. I also have the option to chart for group sessions. So if I were to go ahead and click into this appointment, which is a group appointment, I can select not written once again. And when I create my note, you'll see that the different clients that are added as attendees for this session will have their own personal section for me to add charting notes on, as well as the general template. So I can chart with general notes for the entire group here, where I can also add client-specific notes that should only appear on their chart on the side here. And these notes will just appear at the bottom when I go to view that charting note for that session with that client. One last thing to note as we wrap up is setting a default chart note template. So you'll notice when I clicked in to create some of these charting notes, the template that I just created was not the first one that appeared. So let's click in here to any of my appointments and see if we can find one that has not been charted on yet. We'll go ahead and just add a new session so that I can pull up that chart note window. All right. So when I go to create my charting note, you'll see that just this generic charting template, maybe in the past I set this as my default, is the first one that comes up, and then I have to go ahead and search for the template I want to use that I just created, or scroll. But if I go to my settings through my gear icon in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see this charting settings page. So under features, just below the smart phrases page actually. So here's where we set those smart phrases. 2 items down is charting. And here I can set my default charting note. So if I just created this new template that I want to be using for individual sessions or for group sessions, you can set it for either or. I can go ahead and now set which one is generally my template that I use. Likely here you'll select the one that's most commonly used. So I can select my new charting note. And if I have a different one that I want to use for my group sessions, I can set that, or I can set it to the same one and save those. So now when I create a charting note on a patient, it will just default to this note that I selected, whether it's a one-on-one session or a group session, and I won't have to scroll through each and every time to select that template and to find that template. All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and wrap up class there. Thank you all for joining. As always, we have several live classes. And so if there's any particular area that we didn't spend a ton of time on today that you wish we spent a bit more time on, certainly check out the rest of our live class offerings and join those. We hope to see you on future live classes. Thanks all.